The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is sponsored by Two Fat Lardies and Coat Dance Paints, and also by the generous donations of you, the listener. Thank you to everyone for your support. The Meeples and Miniatures podcast, episode 114. Dead Man's Hand, with guest Stuart McCorquadale from Great Escape Games. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Meeples and Miniatures podcast with me, your host Neil Shuck. Flying solo on today's show, as the majority of the show is taken up with an interview I recorded recently with Stuart McCorquadale from Great Escape Games. As well as the interview, I'm also going to be doing a review of Dead Man's Hand, which is a set of Wild West rules, which they released at Salute earlier this year. Before we get that far, I just want to give a quick shout out to John W, who recently left a review of the podcast on the UK iTunes site. Thanks for the positive review, John. Very much appreciated. On the review, John does mention the fact that if only I could find a podcast that I could listen to so I could actually spend some time painting, as opposed to just talking about painting. Yeah, thanks, John. I know exactly what you mean. I'm kind of in the process at the moment of desperately trying to get my hobby organised. As you may have noticed, I'm not exactly the most organised person in the world when it comes down to sorting out hobbies and various other bits and pieces. You know, we just kind of, okay, well, I need to do this and I need to get this done. The podcast is a case in point, although, I've been dragged kicking and screaming into being a bit more organised on that front. And I hope that's something that you've noticed over the last couple of shows or so. Anyway, all being well, this will be reflected in what you may see on the blog over the next few months. Certainly, if you've read Forward Observer in Miniature Wargames, you'll know that I'm in the process of currently reviewing basically what I've got in my hobby collection, and looking at essentially what I can achieve and what's practical. So, I think it's going to be a case of I'll look down and go, right, I've got all this stuff that I can do, all this stuff that I can't achieve, and the stuff that I can't achieve, I think it's time that, I get a hanky out and suddenly wave goodbye to it all. Anyway, enough of my trials and tribulations. So, as I say, on this show, first off, we got an interview with Stuart McCorquadale. We talk primarily about Dead Man's Hand, but cover a few other things as well. And then I'll be coming back with a full review of the rules themselves. So we'll take a quick break, and we'll chat to Stuart when we come back.
I don't like it, Sergeant. Me neither, sir. Good Lord, it's really looking pretty bad. Yes, sir. It happens every time, sir. It's too predictable, sir. How far do you think we've advanced, Sergeant?
6 inches, sir. It's always 6 inches. We advance 6 inches, then Jerry gets a go. The lads are calling it Hi-Go Hugo, sir.
Hi-Go Hugo? Good grief.
And they don't like it, sir.
Oh. Not like it. Seems pretty straightforward to me. Rather like cricket. We have an innings, then the other chap does.
Well, that's all very well, sir, cricket, sir, but begging your pardon, it ain't like that, sir, in war. I don't think Mr. Hitler plays like that.
What, Hitler? No, gosh, he'd like to go all the time.
Oh, Lord, Sir Lummy. Well, sir, anyway, sir, it's like this, sir. If it carries on like this, I go, you go, me and the lads won't be coming to your Thursday evening games club, and that's the way it is, sir.
Looking for more of a challenge with your World War II games? Are you tired of the predictability of I go, you go systems? Ein bin Shopman provides real command challenges on an unpredictable battlefield. Two fat lardies, playing the period and not the rules since 2002. Pip pip.
Well, I'm very pleased to welcome to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast Stuart McCorquadale from Great Escape Games. Welcome, Stuart. Thanks for coming on to the show.
Hi, Neil. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you and catch up. This is something we've been hoping to do for a while when we just haven't had quite a chance to put our calendars together. Obviously, we're going to be talking about a load of things to do with Great Escape Games. But before we start, a question I normally ask my guests that I have on, Stuart, how did you get started in gaming and how did you get into Great Escape Games in the first place?
Well, I think it probably betrays my age a little bit to say that I started with 1/72 scale Airfix Napoleonic figures.
Oh, good man, yes.
when I was about 13, maybe 12, 13, and I found a little gaming group that did Napoleonic wargaming.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did that for a little while, but when I moved, I struggled to find a gaming group and eventually fell in with some fantasy gamers. And so, just because of the nature of the opponents, did a lot of fantasy gaming, up until I eventually ended up working for Games Workshop. And then that got me back into historical gaming, where my true love is. It's what I really want to be gaming. And really, it's been all historical in the last 10, 12 years or so.
Well, when you say you're working for Games Workshop got you back into historical gaming, which bit of Games Workshop were you actually working for?
Well, I was in retail for a little while, but it was the exposure to some of the people within the head office environment.
Oh.
I actually did end up going and working in the Nottingham head office. Mm-hmm. But it was exposure to some of those people because there were people like Dave Gallagher, Ali Morrison, the Perrys, who also had their historical sidelines and their historical interests. And of course, a lot of the stuff that these people did was inspired by historical miniatures. That's obvious when you look at a lot of the Perry stuff, for example.
Yeah, sure.
And that just got me back into it and introduced me a bit more to the wider world of wargaming, because I came to the UK from Canada, and so I didn't have that exposure to the UK gaming scene. There wasn't really much of a gaming scene where I lived, but it wasn't until I came to the UK that I was exposed to the wider gaming scene, and of course the absolute wealth of gaming paraphernalia, figures and rules that are outside the fantasy genre.
Yeah. Okay, so where did Great Escape Games come from?
In 2005, I left Games Workshop, and it was upon leaving Games Workshop, when I was deciding what to do, that conversations came up with two friends, two other ex-workshoppers, and we thought, well, why don't we do some miniature gaming stuff of our own? Being a workshop helped us a lot with regard to how to produce miniatures and put things together. A couple of us knew a lot of the internal workings of workshop as well, which helped us. Yeah. And we just decided to go for it. And so we did. And World War II was really the thing we were focusing on then. Mm-hmm. We released a World War II range and with which we collaborated on with Bolt Action,
yes,
in their pre-Warlord days, and produced a rule set called Rules of Engagement, which is still in print, still going well. It's a great little platoon level World War II game, and we approached that from the World War II viewpoint. We wanted it to make it a World War II game, and so that it felt specifically World War II.
Yeah,
and so in these platoon level games in Rules of Engagement, it's really fascinating when you're either playing as the attacker or defender, because you have to apply real-world tactics. It's not a simulation, of course. We all know that. These are all toy soldier games.
Yeah.
But the tactics really feel like World War II, which is what we wanted to achieve. And it was that desire to approach wargaming from history first point of view that really inspired us. Then of course a few years later we've released Dead Man's Hand, which goes the other way. And
Indeed.
just looks at the cinema.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, obviously, in the meantime, the other big rule set you released was Clash of Empires.
Yep.
At a time when an awful lot of people were coming out with big battle ancient rule sets, was it just one of those things that several people kind of had the idea, and obviously these things don't take 5 minutes to produce, so was it just one of those things that there was a whole load of timing came in when you had, the likes of Hail Caesar coming out, and then your own, and then we've had War and Conquest and stuff? Was it just one of those things that, it was a bit like buses?
Yeah, well, I think there have been about 5 come out in the last couple of years. We actually had a conversation with John and Paul from Warlord Games about ancient rule sets. I think maybe about a year and a half before Clash of Empires came out, and they were telling us about what they were doing with ancients as well. So, I think most people in the industry, a few people in the industry knew that these rule sets were coming out maybe a year before they ever did, maybe 18 months before they ever did. We know Rob from Scarab Miniatures as well. We knew his was coming out. Deus Volt's come out as well, being one or two others. But I think within the small, tight-knit manufacturers community, I think most of us knew that all these rule sets were coming out, and it was just pure coincidence. There was a little bit of... I think it was obvious to see that Warhammer Historical was going the way it did. Yeah. When it did, and that's primarily because from a purely cold-hearted capitalist view, the decision to close down Warhammer Historical was the correct one. Now, I'm definitely not a cold-hearted capitalist. I'm definitely not. My politics don't go that far right, certainly. But just from that viewpoint, the Warhammer Historical Department didn't do anything to benefit Games Workshop's core business. Their core business is to sell fantasy, sci-fi toy soldiers. Yeah. Warhammer Historical doesn't tick that box, so there was no need for them to do it. This was pretty obvious from the point of view of a lot of people, and I think that was obviously part of the decision-making, but and maybe part of the reason that you saw 5-6 rule sets come out in a 2-3 year period.
So, having said that, I mean, obviously from your side of things, you've been supporting Clash of Empires with 2 or 3 supplements. Is that a rule set that's been doing well for you?
Yeah, absolutely. We support it with there are 2 source books out now. And then Kingdom of Heaven, which covers the Crusades, is at the printers right now. We do a lot of online work as well. So there are a ton of army lists online. And so, the success of Clash of Empires has fueled all of that activity. Yeah. And will continue to do so, hopefully. And it's a long-term project. It's always been a long-term project that still has a year or 2 to run as far as the source book material goes. Yeah. Following that, we're going to do some completely different stuff with Clash of Empires, which has been in the planning now for a couple of years. With respect to other material we can publish, which is going to be a lot of fun. If only there was more time. There was only more time to contribute to just reading. Reading takes up an enormous amount of our time. Yeah, it's tremendous. Of course, for Dead Man's Hand, it was also a little bit of movie watching as well, but. That's a little bit easier.
I was say it's a real hardship, isn't it?
Yeah.
So as you sort of hinted, having brought out 2 firmly historical rule sets, with a say platoon level game and then big mass battle game, what made you go with Dead Man's Hand and going down to cinematic cowboys?
It's a pure pure self-indulgence. Well, Mark Wheatley, who's the co-founder of Great Escape Games. Now, I love westerns, but he really loves westerns. He's crazy about westerns. He can tell you every movie Clint Eastwood's been in and what character he was in that movie, all sorts of nonsense like that. But I love westerns as well, and westerns are one of those. I don't know if there's anything quite like westerns, because westerns are an iconic film genre, and they really cover a small amount of time, relatively small amount of time, in usually quite restricted locations. It's the United States, isn't it? It's 1870s United States. And there's no other film genre that does that. Sci-fi doesn't do that. Sci-fi covers, we know what sci-fi covers, and romantic comedies cover, all sorts of periods and situations. But westerns are just this fixed genre that's fascinated moviegoers for decades and decades. I started off, as you know, I grew up in Canada, so westerns were normal fare there. It's usually the John Wayne type western, or cowboys and Indians type western. I always cheered for the Native Americans. But that was most of what was on offer in Canada, and I love that. And then you find out about spaghetti westerns, and then there's been the recent resurgence in Hollywood. You've seen films like Appaloosa come out, 3:10 to Yuma, The True Grit, and also some original films as well, like Open Rain a few years ago. And the Western genre of movie making it's just so iconic, and that gaming wise, when you look at that, it's really quite nicely, tightly contained. If you look at previous rules, let's take World War II. World War II covers, it's quite a bigger animal.
Very much so, yeah.
And a lot of it's very technical as well. And then when you go to ancients and medieval, obviously that encompasses most of the world. But westerns, it's just some cowboys in a town, really, when you get down to it, or some outlaws chasing a stagecoach or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing translates to miniature gaming really well. You could take any period and apply it to that sort of gaming. But I think the Old West is particular to it. The great advantage of that is that you just don't need many figures. And sometimes, now I'm an army painter. I like to paint big armies. But sometimes it's nice to just have to paint a few figures, isn't it?
As somebody who struggles with painting at the best of times, I heartily agree with you, yes. There have been, over the years, a few Western games that have come out, and I think they've kind of captured the genre to a greater or lesser extent. Some have been pretty popular. I mean, what was it? Legends of the Old West, for example, did hugely popular for Warhammer Historical. So, with you looking at bringing out Dead Man's Hand, what was in your at the back of your mind as far as coming to was it coming to the genre from a slightly different direction, or was it just a case of okay, we want to do a cowboy game, let's see how we can approach it, how we can approach it differently?
Yeah, well, I think the latter one, because we started with the premise of a cowboy game, and then okay, we want to do a cowboy game, let's start from there. We didn't have any mechanic in mind. We had a completely clean slate. There have been some sets, and you may be able to pick them out, where it seems that the designers have had a gaming mechanic and then applied it to a given period, whatever that may be.
Yes.
But we did it the way we always do, when we started with the genre first, and then looked how we could get some mechanics and some ways of running this game that would just give you the feel of Old West cinema. I think because it is the case that real history, and cinema have become conflated into one in the Old West. Maybe the legends that were born out of paperback novels and newspaper reports from the late 19th century. Some of them have been overblown, I think it's fair to say. And so, really, if we're honest, probably gunfights in the Old West, for real, they're probably quite boring. I imagine that even the gunfight at the OK Corral, which really just took a few seconds, didn't it? Was probably quite boring, actually, and wouldn't make particularly good cinema.
Indeed,
so that's why.
You kind of read these accounts of things where actually, in reality, they were kind of pretty much dark back alley fights and.
Yes. Yes, or just plain murders. Just somebody murdering somebody else. And so of course, that's all great. The history's all really inspiring. But I'm going to be upfront and honest and say Dead Man's Hand is really influenced by the cinema. So the kind of gunfight I want is the kind of gunfight that you see when you watch Open Range, which is my favourite gunfight in Western movies. Yeah. If the listeners haven't seen the gunfight in Open Range, go onto YouTube. You know what to type in and watch it. It's absolutely brilliant. It's to and fro. Bullets are flying everywhere. Folks are getting hit twice, 3 times, 4, 5 times and crawling off to recover. It's fantastic. And that's the kind of thing we wanted to get. And so that's why it all had to be super fast-paced and had to be super, super simple. The game mechanics for Dead Man's Hand are remarkably simple. There's no complication at all. The terrain rules are really super simple. And really the action is driven by the deck of cards that you get with the game.
Yes, which is an inspired move, considering how many times do you see Cowboy sitting down and playing cards at some point during a cowboy film?
Yeah, it's obvious. It's an obvious thing to do, but it's the right thing to do.
But you say it's obvious. Not many people do it.
Not many people do. A couple of Western games have used cards in some way, but we really wanted to use the cards to just throw in loads of things that would, if you like, override turn sequences or override the rules. Yeah. So that when you because the cards are used in 2 ways. A, they're used for initiative, and B, they're used in your hand. And the cards in your hand, you play them for the effect, and they either mess up your opponent's actions or they do something to enhance your own die. And these are never expected. Your hand's hidden from your opponent. And then when we use the initiative cards at the start of a turn, use the deck of cards to, each model gets one, and the value of the card determines when he's going to activate in the turn. And that's in front of you. Everybody reveals that. So everybody can see who's going to act first, second, third, and so on. But then we throw another rule into it that allows us to interrupt any other models go. So you literally have no idea how a turn is going to turn out. And so many times the initiative cards have come out and I've rubbed my hands and I've thought, oh yeah, I've got 5 of my guys going before any of his. I'm going to clean up now. And it's ended in disaster. And then you've got 5 guys at point blank range, having done their stuff, all vulnerable to the other guys. The other guys go.
Yes.
And it's crazily unpredictable. And of course, that's what it should look like. Because you look at those really well done gunfights like an Open Range, and they're all over the place. It's so unpredictable. And
of course, it also puts in that extra decision making that you've got, where you've got a really good card in your hand. You really need the initiative, but at the same time, you really need that effect.
Yes. Yeah. Well. The real decision making in Dead Man's Hand, the one that continues to grapple with my mind. I can't. It's a great rule, and I just don't know when to use it properly. It's the interruption, when you can interrupt another model's go. Because the way the rules work is, if you activate when your initiative has come up, then you get 3 actions. If you interrupt, you only get 1 action for the turn. So you burn your activation, in effect, to get a quick shot off or to duck back behind a barrel. And so many times, the other guy's guy has come around the corner, he's at point blank range, he's got 2 shots. And I think, no, I'll risk it, because then I'll shoot him back if he doesn't hurt me, and I've gone down. where just ducking back preserves your guy for the turn, and then you can rebuild. And it's just like in some of these westerns where you see people ducking back into a building or or get down into some cover and just composing themselves. And the rule gives you that effect absolutely perfectly. I love the way it works out. I must learn how to use it properly. so many times I get it wrong.
That gets to something when somebody will at you still going, oh yeah, after all this time playing this game, I still don't know how to play it. Yes. I still don't know how to use it properly.
Yeah. The other nice thing with the cards is that, like I said, the cards have these different effects that can screw up your opponent or can enhance your own guy. But also, you got to keep in mind if the opponent's going to play cards, because there's a rule in the game that if somebody plays a card and you've got the same value card in your hand, then you can play your card to cancel out his card. So sometimes you think it's really funny if you play the stumble card on somebody, which ends their go, basically. You think it's funny if his gunfighter's coming out into the street to blow my guy into pieces. I'll play stumble on him. And you gamble your turn on that very fact that you got the stumble card in your hand.
Yes.
And you think you're all good and clever. You got a big grin on your face. Your gunfighter's just stumbled, and my shotgun's about to take aim. And then he throws down his stumble card and trumps it and says, "Nope, I'm going to be firing." And of course, even funnier when it works the other way around. But that's a great use of the cards as well, and that's what makes it. Again, that's another layer that makes it unpredictable.
Yeah, and it makes it a very interactive game, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, and of course there's that other slight nuance in the fact of, okay, we're also looking at how fast can you actually put your cards down on the table.
That's the funny thing. The rule, the way for the listeners that don't know, the way that the initiative works is that both guys start with their deck in their hand. The first card you reveal, you look at, and you assign that to a model. Whoever gets that card down first on the table has priority for any drawn initiative cards later in the turn. So it does lead to some players developing a style in which they just flip over the card and throw it. and just land it at a nearby model. They don't care what's happening. I like to be a little bit more reserved. I like to know what the card is, because I've got guys that want to go first. So if I got a high card, I want to give it to the right guy.
I just think, going back to this cinematic feel, the one thing that really struck me about the way you structured these scenarios in the book is they have this structure that builds through a series of 3 scenarios. And I was thinking about it coming home tonight and thinking, it's amazing how many westerns have that structure, where you have the initial confrontation, then you have something that goes on in the middle, and then you have the final showdown at the end. And there's so many follow that same structure, and here you are reproducing it in the game. It works superbly well.
Yeah, you know exactly where I stole it from. It does, because what it does is you meet at the club and you set up your terrain, and you start with the opening scene. And these opening scenes, I have had opening scenes that lasted 30 seconds and the game was over. That's happened before. Usually they're going to last 5-10 minutes. Then that's a natural tea break, and then you come back and you don't have to change the scenery for the second game because you're in the same town. And then you go up into the second scene, which has a few more models in it, probably takes half an hour. Then it's another tea break, and then you're back for the gunfight at the end of the movie, which is all the guys on both gangs, and it's basically a shootout to the death. Very much follows that very broad general movie structure.
Yeah, and obviously from a supporting point of view, you've gone away with again this, I suppose, fairly familiar mechanic now of creating, for want of a better word, gangs. That you can play and then campaign with. It works well in a Western setting, but that is a structure that will be familiar to anybody who has played a lot of these games with a limited number of figures.
Yeah, well, I think nearer this, I said that we wanted to keep this simple, and that is very much the case. There's no building up games on a piece. You don't need a piece of paper to write down your game list. It's very basic. It's really in the gameplay and the cards that you get all this variety of actions. Although, saying that, part of the plan is to release The Legend of Dead Man's Hand early next year, which introduces a few new games and has some more scenes in it.
Oh, good.
But it's really about a campaign, a club campaign, where you've got 4 or 6 gangs of guys or whatever, and the gangs get involved in business enterprises and criminal schemes, and their objective is to build enough reputation to win the campaign. Whatever that means. I mean, for outlaws, it might mean getting to the Senate. for the cowboys, it might be having 1,000 head of cattle and 2 grandchildren on your knee. For desperados, it might be going out in a blaze of glory. Is what you want to do.
Yeah.
But whatever it is, once you reach 31, a certain level of reputation, then the campaign is won. And the best way to earn reputation, obviously through playing games and shooting the other guy dead and winning the game, but also building up these business enterprises from turn to turn so that they yield you money and influence and so on and so forth, infamy even. And it's a nice little extra twist on the way to run a campaign and to build your gangs up. Of course, there's all the skills sort of stuff that you definitely want in a campaign setting. So you can take your guys that are just lowly dudes to start with, could grow up and become legendary gunfighters. But more often they'll be dead. But it's an extra little, having these schemes, these business enterprises is an extra big, it's a very important, but it's a nice twist to add to a campaign. And again, sits in with the theme.
Obviously, along with the rule sets themselves, you've got a whole supporting cast of miniatures, and obviously, as much as the miniatures are part of the game, another part of the game is the terrain itself. And on this, I think you pulled off a bit of a coup with the stuff that you've had produced for Dead Man's Hand with Foreground.
Yeah, well, we talked to Foreground. It's last year because we already worked with them. You're just selling their stuff, and we knew them, and they're really, really lovely guys. It's very much a family business, and this side of their business is actually a sideline for them. Their main business is something else. But there's obviously been a bit of a revolution in the past few years with the MDF laser cut buildings.
Yeah.
But Foreground took it up a notch. They've taken it up a couple of notches now, because their first early kits they've learned from, they've applied, the coup that they've applied is the pre-painted aspect, which is great. I mean, I love terrain modeling, but like you, like everybody else out there, I've got a finite amount of time for my hobby activities. And yeah, I like to do the regular gaming, but like everybody, much of my hobby activity is scenery and miniature painting, and I just want to devote more to miniature painting. I've got lots of miniatures to paint, tons of them, and I've got lots of projects I want to do, and I'm always really disciplined with my painting project, so I just don't have the kind of time for terrain making that maybe I once had, and for them to offer those at pretty decent prices, if you ask me. And pre-painted so that I just have to glue them together over a couple of evenings is a winner.
Especially in something as iconic as a Western. Yeah, the town itself is a character, and what they put into the buildings and stuff. I mean, when you were showing off the game, and I played at Salute with you, which seems like an age ago now. Yeah. But I still can't get over this thing of where you have these hinged doors that hinge both ways.
Yeah,
and stuff like that. I mean, it's just thinking it's a 28mm model building, for goodness sake.
Well, Ben Foreground has been given the challenge for the saloon to have springy doors. That's his challenge for the saloon. We said, yeah, springy doors. Could you do them? He said, yeah, I can do that. I can definitely do that. I can't wait to see if he pulls that off. That'll be amazing. Oh, springy doors.
Springy doors. Oh, superb.
Yeah.
Okay, you've got a range. I'm just looking to see. Well, how many buildings are there in the current Dead Man's Hand range?
9, 11 now, including the gallows and the brand new part constructed buildings.
Oh yes, these buildings under construction. Yes, buildings under construction. Yes.
Yeah, release day was today. In fact, the 23rd of September. So they're just out now. And over the weekend, I put a couple together while I was painting miniatures, I must add. And they took me. Oh, they were lovely to put together. They look really fiddly, but they're not that fiddly at all. And they took me about 15 minutes each to put together. And they look great.
Oh yeah. Wow! I'm impressed they go together that quickly. As you say, they're effectively like a building net, and
yes.
It looks one of these things of somebody with big fat fingers like me. I'm thinking, oh good grief, just the thought of putting those together.
No, it's remarkably easy. Yeah, it looks complicated. It's not, but they've been great to work with, and they've got loads more buildings planned. We just give them a list. We say, yeah, we'd love this, Ben. We'd love this, Adam. And they just pick off the list because it's the things that inspire them that make them so good. So when they're inspired, they make great stuff, which is kind of the way they work with everything. They're making stuff that inspires them. You can tell.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Certainly. So that covers all the buildings, and then obviously you've got the miniatures packs. Whether it be the lawmen or the desperados or the outlaws, you just released some new citizens, haven't you?
Yep. Well, all these models are sculpted by my favourite sculptor, Steve Sala. I think he's wonderful, and he's produced some really, really, really cracking figures. In all of them, bar one, I think, all of them were inspired by westerns or TV series. Some of them are a little bit obscure. So one of the outlaws is inspired by one of the members of the outlaw gang in Appaloosa. So it's not a named character as such or someone you'd instantly recognize. But a lot of them, you look at them and you think, oh, yeah, I know where he's from.
Yes.
And my favorite one, actually, is out of the Lawman gang. And he's based on Cullen Bohannon from Hell on Wheels. And it's just a lovely figure. Steve captured him really well. And captured the look of the character on the. I mean, it's not direct. When I say their influence, we change them. We always change them a bit. So he's just absolutely exactly what we envisaged for that character. He got it absolutely 100% on. And there are some others like that. The outlaw that looks a bit like Charlie Prince from the 310 to Yuma remake. Yeah. That's an absolutely stunning figure. It's been fun working with Steve on producing those figures, and the way we worked it with Steve is that the sculptors always get a brief. He gets a brief for every figure, which always includes some photos from various westerns of equipment and faces and things like that.
Yeah,
westerns have inspired us all the way through, and there are more coming as well.
Yeah, I was going to say. Obviously, one thing that is most noticeable that you haven't got, although you got things like rudderless horses and stuff, you haven't got mounted figures. One would imagine that, especially with the campaign system coming out, that would be something that that would be a direction you'd need to go in potentially, or is that something you're thinking of steering clear of?
It's actually down to time. It's actually resources at the moment. We're sculpting 4 new gangs for the Legend of Dead Man's Hand, and they're going to take quite a bit of time, and we would love to do mounted figures of every single figure we've done. That would be a dream. We're not going to. It's just not going to happen. But we are going to do some mounted figures. I'm not going to make any commitments on time or anything like that. Because all I know is on the schedule is we've got to have 4 gangs out by the time Legend of Dead Man's Hand is out. So they're the priority. There will be some other bits and pieces as well, though. We're working with Foreground to do a wagon set, which includes a driver, horses, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And casualty figures and the odd bit and piece here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Some chickens. I've always wanted chickens, so we're going to have some chickens.
That seems That's a bit of a left field thing. Okay, yeah, we'll have this gang, and some chickens.
Well, when we do the demo game all around these shows, there are always a couple. I've got a little goat and a chicken that's usually on the table, and everyone always asks, "What are the stats for the chicken?"
I like it.
We're not going to have any stats for the chicken. There's going to be no stats for the chicken, but there will be a chicken.
Now, are there any plans to expand it any further? I mean, obviously, I suppose a natural progression is perhaps looking at going into something like the Plains Wars or anything like that. Are there any thoughts about expanding it to that sort of thing, or is that not really where you want to go?
The Plains Wars, I think, is a completely different animal, isn't it? It's a completely different thing. It's about U.S. cavalrymen massacring civilians, or the Native Americans uprising and fighting back, and it's a completely different type of fighting. So I'm not saying that's something we'd never do in the future, but I'm saying that Dead Man's Hand really revolves around these small communities, whether they be a town or they might be a mining camp. That's another direction we're considering. There might be towns in different settings. So you might be in Washington State, or you might be in California Highlands. You might be in New Mexico on the border. So those sorts of settings are the ones we're going to stick to. Now, a possibility in the future is, what if a war party attacks a town? Yeah. Okay, that's a consideration. That fits in. That may fit in. I'm not sure how, but going out into the Plains Wars, no. I don't think it's related.
Fine, okay, but I suppose one of the thoughts was thinking, there is this, I suppose, this separate thing of maybe doing things like convoy protection and protecting settlers, and that's where it does fit in, and that's one way we are going. So, for example, that one of the gangs in the Legend of Dead Man's Hand is Indian Renegades, which are being sculpted right now. So that definitely comes into it. So yeah, you're spot on there, and I think that fits in with Dead Man's Hand. But I should mention that 7th Cavalry are one of the gangs in the Legend of Dead Man's Hand. So they make their appearance in that way. Yeah. But they're operating somewhere else, doing other stuff, rather than out on their horses out on the plains, hunting Indians. Right. So we talked a lot about Dead Man's Hand, and obviously, with that being your major release at the moment, it's something that you're majoring on. I'm just wondering, looking more towards the future, you've already mentioned Kingdom of Heaven coming out imminently. Is there anything else you can tease us with? Anything else you can currently talk about as stuff that's that you're working on in the background, or stuff that's maybe you're looking to release for next year, or what have you?
Well, there is one thing that I'll try to be a bit general about. One thing that we are working on in the background. This again, you might think I'm some sort of guy that wildly swings one way to the other. But this is big battle stuff, and it's Napoleonic.
Oh wow! Okay.
And it came about when I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and he was talking to me. He knows we've known each other for many, many years, and he knows I started out in Napoleonics, and he was wanting to get me back into Napoleonics, and I know that a commitment to get back into Napoleonics is something that's going to take years of your life.
Yes.
It's going to, yeah. All those cross belts and epaulettes and piping, that's taking years of your time. So you've got to be firmly committed to that. And I wasn't. I said no, Tone. I'm not interested. I can't get back into it. I got all this to do. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. And then he told me about the rule set that his club played, which is it's a homegrown rule set which his club and a couple of others use. And he told me how they use it. It's specifically for really big games. Yeah, so it's probably going the opposite way of the zeitgeist of the industry at the moment, but it's specifically for huge games. And the idea is that you as a player, you paint up a division of troops, and then you play in a multiplayer setting where you've got 3, 4, 5 players aside.
Oh, right, okay.
And the beauty of that, when he described it and then handed me the rule set, was that when he handed me it, it was 8 pages long. And that was it.
Wow. Okay, that's quite impressive for that level of game.
It's very impressive for that level of game. He's got an interesting way of driving the game through the use of tokens. But the twist on it, which I really love, is that it's on a given side. So we're on the French side. If I'm the commander-in-chief, I'm the guy who gets all the tokens, and these tokens are what activates units and makes units move and fire and so on. Mm. I, as the commander-in-chief, divvy them out amongst my divisional commanders. So the commander-in-chief has got to look at the whole battlefield. He's got to look at so the commander-in-chief is a player, but he plays a different game to the other players under his command. He's got to look at the whole picture and then listen to his divisional generals and divvy out the resources. And so it leads to some really interesting group dynamics. Which is a bit of fun. So in our last game, we had one group which was dictatorial, and one group which was democratic. And the dictatorial one, as you probably might expect, got things done quicker and maintained the initiative for most of the game, until the democratic ones actually started to evolve the way they were doing things, and actually became more efficient in the end. And the roles, the positions had reversed, so that the democratic team was getting all the initiative, which is just an interesting little dynamic.
Oh, right.
But yeah, part of really the fun with the game is A, that group dynamic, and B, knowing that you're in a big battle, because as I said, everybody collects a division, and still a division of soldiers. If you're playing, say, in 28mm, which a lot of people really love, a division of soldiers is still quite a lot of men. You know, you might be paying 120, 150 men. Yeah. Which if you're picky like me, I have to get all the piping right, and this and that. That can be quite a long haul with Napoleonic troops.
That's going to take you a while. Yeah. This is why I gained Napoleonics in 6mm.
Yeah. I see. I'd still be fussy about the cross belts and epaulets in 6mm. But that's I probably should have chosen a different scale, but it was other people's fault that I went 28mm. Right. So I've had to pay for it. Oh well, only 20 more heavy cavalry to go.
Right. So I suppose this is one of those things where you think, thank goodness for plastic.
Oh God. Do you know what? I wish I'd have done it all in metal.
Really?
Yeah, I just find the plastic stuff. The plastic stuff isn't so bad. Some of the plastic stuff's great, but I find metal stuff easier to clean up and get ready, and the details not necessarily sharper, but deeper in the metal figures. Yeah, and so I find the metal ones a little bit easier to paint, and definitely easier to prepare.
Yes. I mean, yeah, certainly there isn't all this fiddly sticking together of stuff and what have you. I must admit, on the odd occasion, especially with some World War II figures, I have thrown my hands up in exasperation and then passed them on to other people.
I know a couple of people like that with Napoleonics.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, when you're the same as me, a lot of the listeners are the same. You've got a finite amount of hobby time, and preparing miniatures isn't something that I'd like to spend a lot of my hobby time on, especially as I tend to be pretty fastidious with respect to painting armies. So I'll buy a unit or two, but then I'll put together one unit and I'll paint that unit, and only nearing the end of the painting of that unit will I put the second unit together. So I don't suffer from this disease of putting 150 figures together all in one go. Oh, that'd be horrible. But I guess it's nice for most people in plastic. When you look at having 150 plastic Napoleonics, it's cheap as chips, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things. And especially when they're looking, some of these fantasy gamers are looking at an army for Napoleonics and they think, a Land Raider costs me that.
Yes.
I can either get my huge Napoleonic army or 200 points of Space Marines.
Yes. Let's face it. After you've painted a Scavan Horde army or a Goblin Horde army, I would imagine that even 120, 150 Napoleonic infantry aren't going to be aren't going to be as daunting as painting 300 Skaven.
Yeah.
Or maybe not.
Yeah.
It depends.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It depends what your painting's like, isn't it?
Indeed.
It really depends on what your painting's like.
Yes.
Give me the Skaven any day.
Actually, talking of painting, that brings me on to something else. Listeners to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast may be aware that a few weeks ago, Mike Hobbs spent 24 hours painting up a Saga, I think it was Pagan Russ army.
Yes.
As part of a charity event, which was actually something that you organised, wasn't it?
It was me, yes. It was. It purely it came about from another Iron Man thing that we'd done before, which was a terrain making Iron Man, which we did over 48 hours and kicked the hell out of a load of us. But it was sort of out of that idea of doing these 24-hour events.
Yeah.
And it was just natural to do it for charity. It seemed like a fun charity event to do. And it was literally 24 hours of painting. I got 40 minutes sleep when my eyes wouldn't open again during that 24 hours, but only 40 minutes. We managed to. That's not bad. And myself and my colleague managed to do 28 mil British figures. Mm-hmm. In the 24-hour period, and sold them off on eBay for a few £100. And overall, we raised nearly £1,200 for Save the Children, which was
fantastic. It was really well done.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I was overwhelmed by the interest and the generosity from people out there, and I think on the Cardiff War Games Club forum, I've thanked loads of people. But we're going to do it every year. So next year we're going to do the same. And we're going to try and encourage. We didn't manage to encourage a few people. See, the idea was you come down to Firestorm Games in Cardiff, and for 24 hours we just paint like crazy.
Oh, right, okay.
For most people, it was painting your own stuff. Yeah, you just chuck a tenner £10 in the hat for the charity, and you sit down and you paint your own stuff. Yeah. So, those 20 cavalry that you've been putting off for ages, it was that type of idea. You bring them down, you get those 20 cavalry done, or whatever project it was. A few of us, Mike Hobbs, myself and my colleague from Cardiff War Games Club, we'd decided to paint specifically for charity, which we're going to continue year on year. But we're going to invite more people to come and join us at the venue, and also people to do it from home as well. Just allocate that weekend for a huge paint-a-thon. It's a great excuse for people that maybe don't get as much hobby time as they deserve with the wife and the kids. You could say, yeah, I'm painting for charity. I've got to do 24 hours. So you can lock yourself up in your gaming room, paint like crazy, and just contribute £10 to the charity online through the page that we set up every year, and get loads of your own models painted, because I find that sometimes I do a lot of painting. I find that sometimes I've got too many distractions because I've always got a movie on, and I can always just pop to the kitchen to get a cup of tea. But when we were at Iron Man, we were all focused, all on one, the same sort of task, and we're egging each other on, and we're all hoping to get our project done. And it was fantastic, and it really works. You paint so much more when you do it in a group.
That whole group dynamic thing really works. It really works, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It works so well that we're doing it. A small group of us are doing it one Saturday a month, and we're doing 8 hours.
Oh, right, okay.
So we just crack on because it just produces results.
I am famous, or maybe infamous, for struggling to put any paint on any sort of model at the best of times, and you can always find an excuse to do something else.
Yeah, absolutely.
we all lead pretty busy lives, and I say with one thing and another, it's okay. You got all these grandiose plans, and we've all got lead mountains the size of whatever, or plastic mountains these days. I suppose several people have, but there you go. But it really does take sometimes just that thought of taking some time out and saying, right, okay, I'm going to dedicate this day to doing this.
Yes.
And but I say especially doing 24 hours for charity is a fantastic event. So this is going to be something that you're going to be doing every year, yeah?
Yeah, every year around August.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'd love to help publicise it, because I think it's a brilliant thing to be doing, Stuart. So
I think it's a fun thing to do as well. And if we could get a few more people involved and beat that £1,150 that we achieved this time round, then that would be great. It's a pretty hard target to beat, but just as more people know about it, we will.
Indeed. So. If people want to know more about it, is it a case of just contacting you via Great Escape or through Firestorm Games? Or
yes, it's best contacting me through Great Escape Games. A lot of people are on Facebook a lot, so you can get Great Escape Games through Facebook. And probably nearer the time, I'll be maybe asking people for their ideas on what we should paint for charity. I've had a couple of ideas, which have been shot down for being far too ambitious. I thought 72 Norman cavalry was achievable.
I remember how long it took me to paint a dozen. I'm thinking, 72? Wow. Maybe I'm being a little bit ambitious, but nevertheless, if we get close to the time, maybe we could get some ideas about what we should be painting. That'd be fun. Well, Stuart, it's been fantastic to speak to you this evening.
You too. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Hopefully, we can get back together sometime later, and maybe next year either look at this, anticipate this new Napoleonic game, and ask you just how long it took you to paint all those French crossbelts. And
maybe I'll even be finished.
It's been great to speak to you, Stuart. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Neil. Speak to you soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is very happy to be sponsored by Coat d'Arms Paints. Now, Coat d'Arms have been supporting miniatures painters with their products for well over 20 years in some way, shape or form. Their current range is 150 sets of acrylic paint, which are available both as individual colours, but also in paint sets depending on period. Things such as the Ancients paint set, the World War II German, World War II American, World War II Russian paint sets. And they also include things like an ACW set and even a Horsetown set. That's one way to purchase your paints. And they also do triads. Now, if you're a fan of the 3-colour system, made famous by the likes of people like Kevin Dallimore, you may like to purchase your paints with a dark shade, a medium shade and a highlight. And the triad system from Coat d'Arms allows you to do this. They also have ranges of textured paints called Brushscape, which allow you to paint from textures onto bases as well as colour. And these are ideal especially for smaller scale models. And if you're a fan of the dip method of painting, then Coat d'Arms have their own product available called Super Shader. This is available in light brown, dark brown and black. Coat d'Arms Paints have a whole range of products available to try. Check them out at www.blackhat.co.uk and be sure to tell them that we sent you. Okay, so obviously you've heard Stuart talk quite a bit about Dead Man's Hand, but what I wanted to do was give you a very quick overview of the rules themselves, go into some bit more detail as to how they actually work and are put together. So what you get is a softback rulebook, 44 pages in full colour. In addition, you get a custom pack of cards to play the game with. These are the action cards we were talking about during the interview. And you can also get hold of a set of MDF counters for the game. Now, it's a Wild West shootout game. Takes place on ideally a 3x4 or a 4x4 table. And usually you'll need somewhere between 6 to 10 figures aside. In addition to this, if you haven't got the counters for the game, you'll need to provide your own set of counters to represent things like wounds, and maybe if someone is reloading, a few other bits and pieces. And also, obviously, you'll need to provide some scenery. And in addition, you'll need some dice. However, this game does not use D6s. It actually uses a mixture of D10s and D20s. Okay? So, something a little bit different, and maybe the odd person may have to go out and buy some different dice. The game is designed with 28mm miniatures in mind, so everything is catered for within that. However, it also caters for both inches and centimetres. There were quick reference sheets in the front and back of the book, basically on the covers. One has everything measured in centimetres, the other has everything measured in inches. So whatever measurement system you are most familiar with using, it caters for you, which in itself is actually quite unusual for a rule set and something I quite like. Okay, so let's have a look at how the game is played. First off, let's consider the cards. These are an integral part of the game and can be used in two different ways. First off, you can use them for initiative. Secondly, each card also has a special action on it, and you can use that special action. So, at the start of the game, you are dealt a hand of cards depending on the scenario. Okay? These cards you use with their special actions. You may play as many cards from your hand in a turn, but you can only pick up one card at the end of the turn, and you can only pick up a card if you've played it. Okay, if you've played one in that turn. So this is a limited resource that you have of special actions you can take. The rest of the cards in your deck are used for initiative. Okay? So what happens is, at the start of a turn, the top card from each deck is turned over. That is then placed by the player against a model of their choice. So you know one card that is being placed in the initiative on your turn. Then every other model in your gang is dealt from your deck a face down card. Once all cards have been dealt, all the cards are then turned face up, and this determines the initiative. Okay? Basically, it goes ace to joker, so ace, king, queen, jack, 10, 9 down, and jokers act last. Now, during the interview, we mentioned about quick draw, basically the first card to hit the table. That means when you have the face-up card is dealt to a model. The first of those face-up cards to hit the floor basically means that that side has the initiative should you be in a situation where you have two models that have the same value. So if you've got someone with a 5 of hearts and someone with a 5 of spades, if the player who had the red cards had dealt his initiative card, his face-up initiative card first, then he would get the jump on somebody with a 5 of spades. I hope that makes sense. And once a model has performed its actions, its card is put into a discard pile. Once the deck has been exhausted and all the cards in the discard pile is reshuffled and becomes a new deck. Okay, so once initiative is dealt with, then you actually come to the playing of the game itself. You go in initiative order, and each model can take 3 actions. Now, what's important here is you must decide on all your actions before you take them. So you can't take one action, see what happens, and then decide what other actions you're then going to take. You have to decide and declare all the actions you're going to take at the start of each model's turn. Actions can be various different things. You can move up to 10 centimetres or 4 inches. Or you may do things like mount or dismount a horse. You can aim. You can shoot, which is taking a single shot. Okay. You can reload or change a weapon. Or you can recover, which is removing what they call an under fire marker. Now, just one further note on actions. A note about movement. Okay. Every time you perform a move action, you are given a move marker. Okay, and so that's placed next to the model that is moving. So you can take multiple move actions in a turn. Same way you can actually take multiple shoot actions, depending on what weapon you've got. Movement also allows for doing various things, like, for example, if you move within 2 centimetres of an enemy, you must stop and you lose all your actions unless you're actually charging into hand-to-hand combat with him. You can also use movement to get within linear terrain and then dramatically dive over the terrain or various other bits and pieces. It's very cinematic in its style. But as a usual thing, you don't tend to lose movement for dealing with scenery. But these movement markers are quite important as we come to shooting. So you declare what you're going to do. And at some point during your turn, more likely than not, you're going to want to shoot somebody. Shooting is worked out by rolling d20s. Okay? Takes you a bit back, takes you back to your old D&D role-playing days. If you roll a natural 1, you're out of ammo and you lose any further shots you are going to take unless you reload. Now there's a certain number of modifiers that you need to apply. You've got to consult 14 in total. But actually this works out fairly quickly and most of them are fairly straightforward. So for example, if the shooter has taken 2 move actions, you get a -1. If it's point blank range, you get +2 if you're using a pistol. You get modifiers for close range and long range. You can get a modifier if you aim. Okay. And that only normally applies to the first shot, except if you aim with a rifle, you can actually do 2 aim actions. So make it even more accurate. You get a modifier for second or third shots, only normally applicable to a pistol or a shotgun. And you get a modifier if you're firing while mounted, but also if you're under fire. You also get modifiers if the target is moving. Remember I talked about move actions. If you take multiple actions, you get 1 modifier for each movement token your target has against it. You get modifier if you're behind substantial cover. If you're a boss, i.e. you're the head of the opposing gang. And modifier if you're mounted. Okay, so quite a few modifiers to think about, but actually it will only take a few seconds to sort out exactly what you're doing. Now, as far as the weapons table is concerned, one of the great things about being in the Wild West, actually, you haven't got a lot of weapons to think about. Essentially, you've got revolvers, you've got rifles, you've got repeating rifles, and shotguns. And that's about it as far as range fire is concerned. Okay? Now, one of the interesting things with the game is that you're playing on a 3x4 or 4x4 board. Pistols have a limited range, essentially 12 inches. Shotguns have a range of either 4 or 8 inches, depending on whether you're firing either one or both barrels. You actually have a shorter range if you fire both barrels simultaneously. That's quite an interesting one. However, Rifles are unlimited range. Basically, if you can see it, you can shoot it. I quite like that. That's one of the, you'll know that if you've listened to the podcast already, it's something I mentioned a lot when we were looking at Chain of Command, for example. I really like games where modern weaponry has, a fairly realistic range on the size of the tabletop that they're playing with. So yeah, pistols are a short-range weapon. Shotguns are a short-range weapon. Rifles, if you can see it, you can shoot it. It's great. Okay, so you apply all these modifiers and you roll your dice. A natural roll of a 1 is a miss and you're out of ammo. 10 and under is miss. 11 to 14 you apply an under fire marker. 15 to 18 you apply an under fire marker and the model has to take a nerve test. And if you score 19 or above, the model is automatically out of action. So, what's an under fire marker, I hear you ask? Basically, this represents things like flesh wounds, just the psychological effect of being fired upon or near misses. Remember earlier I said you could use a recover action to remove a fire marker, so it's effectively a bit like a rally if you like. So each recover action you move removes a single marker. Essentially, these under fire markers are cumulative. If most models accumulate 4 under fire markers, then they're out of action. But bosses, you have to accumulate 5. Now, I talked about taking nerve tests, and some things allow you to take some results mean that you have to take a nerve test. You have to roll a d10 against the nerve of your character, which is one of the attributes. Okay. If you roll equal or above, then you've passed. If you roll below, you fail. And if you fail, you add an extra under fire marker to your model. This also becomes interesting if you happen to be on a horse, or if you happen to be up high, for example, if you're shooting from a balcony or something like that. Because if you fail a nerve test, then it is deemed that you could potentially fall. So you then roll the dice to see if you fall backwards or you fall forwards. Which could be quite interesting if you're firing from a balcony or you're up on a balcony and you're hit and you fail your nerve test and fall forward. Usually that will mean you'll fall off the balcony and onto the floor and take damage from falling. Okay, now one thing I haven't mentioned as far as shooting is concerned is you can interrupt. Okay, so if your model is under fire, you may do one of two things, and that's if you're firing at a model that has yet to be activated. Okay, if you're firing at a model that has already been activated that turn, they can't do anything. However, if you're firing at a model that hasn't been activated this turn, they have a choice of essentially discarding what they were going to do and either ducking back or making a quick shot in response. If you duck back, you can move 10 centimetres either away from the shooter or towards cover. Okay? If that gets you out of sight, the shooter can still fire one shot at you. It is assumed that they get a shot before you get away, but you get a penalty to that shot. But a duck back burns your turn. Okay, so you have the opportunity to do that. Alternatively, you can try and get a quick shot off. So only one model can do this per activation, and depending on the range, the shot either happens before, simultaneously, or after the person firing at you. So you have the opportunity to fire at the person firing at you. Assuming, of course, you still can, especially if it turns out that the point that that they are firing before you do. And again, this burns your activation. Okay. Now, the final thing we cover is hand-to-hand fighting. Hand-to-hand fighting takes place if you're within 2 centimetres of an enemy model, and obviously you can move into hand-to-hand combat as you wish, except you cannot take 3 move actions to get into hand-to-hand combat. Maximum you can take is 2. You both roll a d10, and you add modifiers. It's a straight opposed roll. And depending on the points of difference, the loser takes that number of under fire markers. Now, rather interestingly, you cannot have multiple fistfights. So you can only have one model from each side involved in a fistfight. And you cannot fire into hand-to-hand combat either. Now, the last thing to think about is nerve tests. Now, I've already talked about nerve tests in the course of the game. There's also something called a big nerve test. Okay. Which is one of the ways that scenarios can end. And basically, if you have more than the half of your men are out of action at the start of the turn, you must take a nerve test with your boss. Or, if your boss is out of action, member of the gang with the highest nerve. If you pass, game carries on. If you fail, the gang retreats and the game ends. Also, if you have double or more of under fire markers applied to your gang as there are models left on the board, then you automatically fail your nerve test and the game ends. Okay, so they're the rules. I think you'll agree, fairly straightforward. Okay, but we talked a lot about gangs. We haven't really gone into them. Okay, so let's talk about the gangs you're going to play with. There are 4 gangs in the game. There are the Law, Outlaws, Cowboys, and Desperados. Now, each member has a certain profile. This profile is weapon, hit, so the number of under fire markers you can take before you're out of action, what your nerve is, shoot, hand to hand, and a reputation. Okay. Shoot and hand to hand give you modifiers on your shooting and hand to hand rolls. The reputation is the cost of the model. And depending on the scenarios, sometimes you can only have models available from your gang for that scenario up to a certain reputation. So you have to select what you're doing. Now, as I said, there are certain weapons available in the game, but at least half your gang must be armed with pistols as their only weapon. Okay, so you can't have your entire gang armed with repeating rifles. Okay, so the way the gangs work, normally you have a boss, which could be a sheriff, a boss in the case of Outlaws, the range boss, or a boss from Desperados. You can then have one guy who is, I suppose, a second in command. So, like for the Law, you have a marshal. For the Cowboys, you have the man with no name. Stuff like this. Then you have a number of just common garden guys. Okay, deputies, bandits, cowboys, and then you can have up to a certain number of I suppose lesser people, upstanding citizens in the Law, what they call varmints in the Outlaws, or lowlifes in Desperados, or greenhorns. Now these are people that are they're very low cost, but they have a few number of hits, and they normally have -1 to shoot and hit and that sort of thing. But they're cheap cannon fodder. Okay? And then each gang has 2 or 3 special rules that they can play during the turn. So there are 4 gangs to choose from. So now you've decided what models you're going to play with, what you need to do is look at the scenarios, and these are what they call the scenes. Okay? Now there are 12 scenes in the book, or scenarios. Okay, and they're divided into opening, second scenes, and final scenes. Okay, which kind of basically follow what normally happens during a Wild West film. So you have 4 opening scenes, 4 second scenes, and 4 climactic battles. Now these are split into 4 campaigns called The Good, the Lead and the Ugly, The Quick and the Lead, For a Few Models More, and A Fistful of Models. I wonder where they got those from. And obviously what you can do, you can play each individual scene as standalone scenarios if you so wish. Usually you play 3 scenes on the go, and actually you don't have to play all 3 scenes from the same collection. So you can play the opening scene from The Good, the Lead and the Ugly, the second scene from The Quick and the Lead, and the final scene from A Few Models More, for example. Okay? Now most scenes have implications, whether you won or you lost them, on what happens in subsequent scenes. So you have to take that into account when you're playing multiple scenes in your game. If you're playing one-offs, don't worry about it. And the other thing is, if you're playing 3 scenes, which would generally take you an evening to do, okay, so that'll take you a full evening, the idea is that you actually play all 3 scenes over the same scenery. Okay, so it's the same setup for all 3 scenes. What usually happens is you end up in a situation where the number of models involved in the scene changes, so you have to change who's involved from your gang in each particular scene. As I said at the start, games are played over either 3x3 or a 4x3 board, and can be played with any sort of arrangement that you so wish as far as scenery is concerned. Although, depending on the scenario, there are some that kind of say, well, ideally you could do with setting things up in this particular way. And that's basically it. So, other than this particular set of scenes, there's no campaign system in the game, although, as Stuart mentioned, that's something they're working on and will be producing next. So there's no campaign system for the game, which in a game of this type is potentially, an awful lot of rule sets when they come out will have a campaign system in it. The fact that Dead Man's Hand doesn't detract from it too much, but again, you've only got a limited number of scenarios, although that covers all the main archetypes of the typical Western. So everything that you've seen in all your Hollywood Westerns are covered in the basic scenarios that you have to fight. Okay, so there's a various amount of variety, and of course, and there's a lot of different combinations of scenario that you can use. So, that kind of keeps things pretty fresh. So hopefully with a campaign system that will keep the game moving and means that you can then, build more character into your gangs. But as a starting point, perfectly fine. A lot of cowboy games are, it's probably one of the most basic sort of game you're going to play when it comes down to gang warfare. And to be honest, you're looking at a lot of skirmish games, gang skirmish games. They're all effectively this sort of thing. They're all effectively this sort of kind of cowboy shootout sort of thing. Whether you're playing Wild West or whether you're playing sci-fi, they all fall into this sort of category. And they work to a greater or lesser extent. I think Dead Man's Hand is an awful lot of fun. I love the way that the activation works with the cards, and the way you've got special actions that you can take and various other bits and pieces. That works really well. So all those mechanics working really together. A lot of flavour, lots of things you can do. Both players are constantly in the game. There's very, very little downtime at all. Everything streamlines really, really well. So from that side of things, it's probably one of the best Wild West games I've played. It's not a genre I am massively into, but I've played 3 or 4, and this is one of the better ones. So there's an awful lot to like, and actually there's very little to dislike. As I say, probably the lack of the campaign system is probably its main downside, but that's being remedied. So, very little to dislike. Now, when it comes down to figures, Great Escape have produced box sets of all their gangs, with, as Stuart was saying, an awful lot of the models using as inspiration characters from various westerns. But obviously, especially with the likes of previous cowboy games being out there are a lot of companies that produce cowboys. Probably the best of those, I would imagine, arguably being Black Scorpion, who have some fantastic cowboys in their 28mm ranges. But there are several companies that produce Wild West figures. So, no problem as far as finding miniatures. Similarly, scenery. Now, in conjunction with Great Escape, Foreground, those masters of MDF, and again, as we've already discussed in the interview, they produce a dedicated range of buildings which are absolutely fantastic. They are easy to put together. They're pre-painted, and yeah, they are superb. But the fact that they're pre-painted does have a cost implication. Okay, so whilst they are very nice, they are also on the expensive end when it comes down to buildings. They are MDF construction, as are a lot of them. But most of the companies that produce MDF buildings have a Wild West range, whether that's war bases, whether that's series of precision, obviously Foreground, and I think there's a couple of others around as well. But they all tend to have Wild West ranges as far as their buildings are concerned. So there's an awful lot out there, and there's an awful lot of there's several in resin as well. MDF is certainly cheaper, and obviously several of the companies, their buildings are just, their buildings are unpainted, so they are going to be cheaper still. Okay, so it's very much a case of what buildings you get depends on your budget, but there is a wide range of buildings available, and basically, unless you're buying Foreground because of the price, £100 will give you a perfectly reasonable Wild West town. You can probably have to consider £150-200 if you're doing Foreground, but remember, on that side of things, that means then you don't have to paint anything, because it's all done and dusted for you. So it depends what premium you put on your time to paint the buildings, basically. Now, the game is available direct from Great Escape Games, via mail order, or actually it's available quite widely from your friendly local game store. And with the fact that you get box sets of the gangs and various other bits and pieces, it's quite easy to get a couple of gangs together, the set of rules. The rules come, as I say, with the deck of cards. The counters come separately. They're available from Foreground, I believe, or from Great Escape. But you don't need them. You can use other things if you've got stuff already available, already in your collection, of course. But everything is pretty easily available. So you should be up and running for your game with a minimum amount of fuss. If you're into cowboy games, I think Dead Man's Hand is it's one of the best that's been around for a while. I love the way the card interaction works with the interrupts and everything else. As I say, the gameplay is very cinematic. It doesn't take a great deal of time, so despite the fact that you potentially got lots of modifiers when you're rolling dice or what have you, it's very quick and very intuitive once you've done it a few times. So if Wild West is the genre that you're into, then actually this is a pretty good game.
Where strategy board games and miniature war games collide. This is the Meeples and Miniatures podcast.
Well, that about wraps it up for today's show, and I hope you really enjoyed it. As I've been trailing over the next few shows, I'm going to be chatting with Jake Thornton, talking about all sorts of stuff, including things like, Dreadball, the new Mars Attacks Kickstarter, and Dead Zone, and God of Battles, and a few other bits and pieces. I'm hopefully going to get some other stuff in there as well, as far as talking to a couple of other people. But that's kind of the plan for what's coming up in the next few weeks. In the middle of all that, I'm also going to be taking a week's holiday in the UK school half term, so things may go quiet for a couple of days. At least it'll get me a chance to do some editing and get another podcast out. Well, that's the plan anyway. So until next time, thanks very much for listening, happy gaming, and we'll catch up with you very, very soon. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. If you want to know more about Meeples and Miniatures, there are several things you can do. First of all, you can visit the website at www.meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. If you want to contact the show at all, you can email me at neil@meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. You can follow the show on Twitter. Simply look for M&M Podcast or click the follow us on Twitter button from the website. We also have a group on Facebook. That's the Meeples and Miniatures Podcast Fan Club. Again, follow the link from the website. And finally, if you want to help us to support the show, you can always donate to the podcast by clicking the PayPal button on the donate page, again found on the website. Once again, thank you for listening. I hope you've really enjoyed the show. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.